Oh my god, books! 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 Ooh, the whole Canary series is there? Nice! Oh man. This is gonna take a while. Okay, I need to drink some water. Yum, yum, yum. Anyways, Carnelia series. Let's freaking go. Chapter 1, The Imperial Chronicle. I stood there upright in front of the revolving door, scruffling the heels of my boots against the ground, pulling slightly on the collar of my trench coat. I dropped my chin and gazed at my partial reflection in the curved glass. Aside from my short, cropped hair, I wore a modest-looking, double-breasted leather raincoat and a pair of special-order steel-reinforced boots, both of which at first glance appeared to be the most common of common apparel. Yet they are in fact much more than the naked eye could detect. Pardon me. Yeah. Clearing my throat, sorry about that. My ordinary average appearance was this, and ordinary appearance today had been any other day times the past. Not far off, the sound of footfalls echoed rhythmically like the steady beat of pendulum swinging back and forth, as the throngs of those coming on moved along quickly. The cobblestone avenue, enveloped and tingled silver by the morning mist. At times, the calling voice of a street peddler disrupted the steady flow. But as soon as the hawking cry faded away, it would resume its course. Each morning that I found myself settling foot into the imperial city, I also found my surroundings to be unchanged and stained by the same somber tone of gray. Snatched up a magazine from the under arm of a street vendor, I tossed a few mirror on the left hand, poised expectantly behind his back. The Imperial Chronicle, the magazine I read so often that even the ink bleeds were familiar. Roughly flipping open its cover, I scanned the headlines along the top of the monochrome pages. Then suddenly my breath caught my throat. At the very bottom of the local news page, I found those letters, a sequence of characters which I had not heard nor seen since the time of the life-changing incidents. My eyes instantly gravitated to the spot and for a time remained fixated. Einslide. Einsilante. The very meaning of those letters became lost in my senses as I stood motionless, my gaze fixed on the same line of text, until it all seemed to be coalesced into a single blotch of ink. After a few seconds of blank comprehension, my vision settled and I wrenched my eyes to the beginning of the article as I began to read. My memories reverged on a single point of my past and then slowly restarted to run in reverse, heading down for the fateful event 3 years prior when the name was first introduced to me. It was on the afternoon, all those years ago on a day unlike this one, where the capital was overshadowed by a typical gloomy aura. I was a little younger than now, at a 22-year-old boy who stood silently in front of the boutique door. As usual, double checking its appearance before lightly treading over Mitch's Imperial factory. It was on the day that it had been arranged for me to receive a new job from Mitch, the shop owner himself. Although he was a dark middle-aged man, I, being the Orbit enthusiast, I found myself as one of his few regular customers. I headed down the dark alleyway, and after passing through a particularly rotten wooden gate, I could see the soft glow of the flickering orbital light fly just outside the entrance of the factory, whose structure is halfway below street level. I first received jobs from Mitch about the time when dissension began to occur in the society over the 100 Days War. It was during the period that relations between the Liberal Kingdom and the Empire was at its worst, and a portion of Ormans had become almost non-existent. Conspiring with the underground elements and planning a smuggling operation, Mitch made it out to me to be his accomplice in crime, for the job which I received by his hand was none other than that of acquirer. Being nothing more than a commoner in my teens at the time I met him, and a Jew devoid of any connection to life. Besides, I naturally jumped at opportunity without a moment's hesitation, yet even after relations with Liberal had returned to some degree of normalcy, I realized that I was in no mood to give up my specialty in which focused mainly on the delivery of stolen goods. The reason being, there was no jobs out there which could bring in the kind of mirror that it did. With an unrefined and inconspicuous appearance, I had countless times before hidden items of various sorts in my hat and trousers, and made my way hither and thither between the borders of those neighboring nations, and though my delight and my wallet had become increasingly laden with a bounty of monetary rewards, I had routinely changed my alias as a precautionary measure, so much in fact that these false names had built up into quite a list over the past few years. I had been known as Phil, the Furbious, Rooney, the Trickster, and even Chris, the Coward. However, Mitch has always called me by one name, Toby. This was the identity I had used for my initial job, and the one I liked above all the others. Okay, looks like a little side story and whatnot. Okay, hello there, Toby. You come just at the right time. Greeting me with these words, Mitch scuffled slightly in the seat behind the counter. The baked confection he had been eating was ever so carefully placed above this lap to prevent it from falling onto the floor. He smacked both his powdered sugar-covered hands together with a clap, and a cloud of white particles puffed into the air. The smell of sweet spices and baked apple pervaded the dimly lit shop. We had an item dropped off no more than a few minutes ago, he continued. Turning into his seat, Mitch reached back and snatched up something, wrapping it in old magazine paper from top to shelf. Tossing it to me. Knowing full well I wouldn't get any sort of answer, I asked anyway. What do we have this time? Laying out my railway and airship tickets, Mitch ignored my question and said, make sure this gets to the same place as always. In his slow drawl, he added, it would be your best interest to keep your involvement to a minimum by leaving the business side of things to me and focusing solely on getting the job done, Toby. He leaned back in his chair and let out a deep sigh, the balls of his fingers kneading the bags under his eyes. Then, once again, his large hands extended down toward the unattended cake resting on his leg. Before the sweet tart could reach his watering mouth, I had already made my way out the door of his tiny shop. As I walked away, papered bundled package bouncing around inside the folds of my bag by the feel of its shape and weight as if it beat steadily against my side. I concluded that the object in my possession was probably just more swag. It didn't make me nervous not to know what it was like, not what it was I was carrying, for I had done this type of job many times before, and no matter what type of trouble I found myself wrapped up in, I always somehow managed to come out unscathed. In truth, my experience on the job had made me tough, and I had become well versed in the art of horrible magic. So it was that, when I laid eyes on the rough-looking trio at the station, I felt no more knots of uneasiness in the pit of my stomach, and than was necessary for someone of my abilities. The platform when the train bound for Libro was bustling with passengers awaiting its eventual arrival. Seeing that the benches were so crammed full of people that they could have very well been a tin of packed sardines, I resigned myself to stand near the entrance as I patiently waited for the train to come in. Twisting my body in order to move the bag to my other shoulder, I noticed the figures of two men. Heads bent together and conversing in an inaudible tone, they stood just beyond the ticket gate, right about where the horse lead of the imperial emblem lay embedded into the ground into a grand mosaic of tiles. After a short interim, another man approached and joined the conversation. From my own perspective, this one ragtag group I most certainly couldn't have given a passing grade to based on looks. All three were extremely well built and sported the same haircut. To put it mildly, they snuck out in the crowd like a bunch of sore thumbs. Making sure to avoid eye contact with them as they glanced my direction, I slung my bag over my shoulder and ever so calmly reached a hand into my pocket and ran on the tips of my fingers across the surface of my ornament. A woman's voice reverberated within the walls of the station, notifying the passengers that the train had arrived. The low rumble of an orbital engine could be felt in the distance, and after a few moments, a large vehicle was seen rolling onto the shoulder. I muttered to myself, all is well. The sound of my voice was drowned out by the din of a massive machine. Brakes screeched, and a flash of black light reflected off the surface of the giant iron beast as it came sliding down and across the rails. The immersive vibration in the air emanated from the moving locomotive at the epicenter, letting me know that the orbital engine had been put into full reverse in order to decelerate and bring the train to a grinding halt. While being shoved to and fro from by waves of impatient travelers flooding out the waiting area, I was swept toward the one door of a passenger car. As we passed by the conductor, I caught another glimpse of the ticket gate. The men who were once there were now gone, and the only thing that remained on the profile was the horse made of glossy tiles, glaring back at me in the shape of deep crimson. Represented of a Septian church. The train barreled on, almost flying toward the thick well of fog. Droplets of water scattered across the window glass, extending out like transparent veins, and continued to wriggle back and forth upon the pressure of the swiftly passing wind. I turned the volume a bit more. Placing the temple of my head against the glass, I stared blankly down the thickets into my hand and rubbed the two of them together between my fingers. I will be traveling by the train to the border city, far from the imperial cousin, and then to reach the liberal kingdom I would have to transfer into an airship. Both my tickets were first class, but not the highest, and the seats available. The passenger car was nearly at full capacity, but for some peculiar reason, nobody had seated themselves in the space next to mine. As I mused above the empty seat, it occurred to me that Mitch had purchased the spot ahead of time, leaving it vacant on purpose. This was no doubt in my mind that he was being paid handsomely to make sure the job was done and done well. Will you be traveling to the liberal kingdom, sir? Right around the time was my trip on the rails. Had passed this halfway mark, I was met with the sudden question, and set up with a start. My eyes searched for the one who asked for it. There, standing in the aisle, was a single woman with a radiant complexion, beaming down at me. She wore a coat with overlapping buckles secured slightly above her breast and appeared to be in her mid-30s. Gingerly bending her knees and pointing her finger at the empty seat beside me, she asked, "Do you mind?" With a tilt on her hand, she indicated that the rear of the passenger car was swirling smoke, saturated the air, and softly muttered, "The smell from the tobacco smoke is just dreadful." Wordless, I nodded and dragged my bag from the place on the floor, moving it over by the window to the opposite side of my feet. The woman expressed her thanks and delicately sat herself down in the seat next to mine. Oh man, he's Haku. Yeah, it's a great poll. For being a perfect stranger, she talked on the endless as I purposely reciprocated my conversation by saying that I was on the way to Liberal Kingdom on business. As an Ormond special. Fudge, okay. There we go, okay. For being a perfect stranger, talked intensely as I appropriately received Ormond specials. There you go. Her story was that she was on a mission of mercy for the church and had an errand to fulfill in the border city. Just so you know, people sometimes refer to me as sister, she went on. Of course, it's just a nickname. And hello, Isui Kwaku. How you doing? Okay, she recrossed her black leather boot-clad legs and let out a sort of suppressed titter from the back of her throat as she made mention of this. Sister Carnelia was her name. Fudge! I did it again. Ugh. Man. Okay. There you go. What's your nickname? We continued on this fashion, subjecting ourselves to a variety of idle banter, and as the time grew on, the sun overhead began to dip into the arc, crossing the celestial meridian and descending into the west. Each time the moving train created a grove of trees, the tire, vehicle, passenger cars, and all was bathed in a warm apricot hue, flooding into the cabins, creating a majestic spectacle. I gaped at the coruscating effect, and in doing so locked my eyes with Sister Cornelia right at the moment of the brilliance of the sinking western light, seeping into her rich brown irises, causing them to give off an exquisite rubescent sparkle. Hiccups made me wonder if the origin of her nickname was somehow related to the color of her eyes being likened to the luster of a polished carnelian stone. The train gradually began to decelerate, and Sister Carnelia returned to her original seat in order to collect her bags. As a matter of habit, I checked my bag in Ormond and found both junk paper covered package and the magical device fastened to my trousers inner pocket by a series of chain stitches, exactly where and how I felt I left it. Yeah. Darn it. I press the button again. Full brilliance and I used to wonder if the origin of her nickname was somehow related to the color of her eyes. Accelerated because of the original seed. Okay, there we go. Bad I checked my bag at home and I found both the junk paper covered package and I left it. The woman's voice came over the intercom, announcing that the train would be arriving on schedule and the rainy weather was to be expected at our destination. As the conclusion of the announcements, a number of disappointing sighs could be heard from coming from along the rows of seats. Rain droplets pattering across against the windows outside as the looming silhouette of the overcast city came to view. The station signal lamp emitted an angular light which was scattered with a refractive effect by the falling droplets of water. Then came a spine-chilling metallic sound followed by the jolt of an orbital engine's reversing thrust as the locomotive at the front of the train lurched to a halt. Over the loudspeaker came another announcement asking passengers to ensure that they did not leave their baggage behind, and with that several people stood up and crowded into the aisle, watching the station worker in uniform as he waved a small flag amidst the falling rain. I picked up my bag and rose to my feet. I crossed the paths with Sister Carnelia as I attempted to step into her aisle, but when she tried to step aside and allow me room to pass, she was suddenly tripped and fell forward. Grabbing over my shoulder for support, she picked herself up and with an embarrassed smile led by me. I gave her a short bow in line with general etiquette practices and tilted for the exit ahead of her. Following my lead, Sister Carnelia scuffled along closely behind me, so close in fact that it felt as if she would step my heels. Something about it just didn't feel right. Instinctively sliding my hand into my pocket, I searched for my orbit, but the brass feeling that I had grown accustomed was nowhere to be felt. In an instant, I felt my arm being twisted behind my back by someone or something with an incredible strength. The sleek sound of a blade being unsheathed and then a wording prick on the tip of my back indicated the seriousness of the situation. "I have what you're looking for, Toby," whispered Sister Cornelia in an almost inaudible tone, her lips barely moving just behind my right ear. Let's not try anything either, shall we? Ooh, this girl. I'd hate to see her afternoon spoiled by any more than it's going to be. And to show that she meant business, Sister Cornelia slightly altered the angle of her grip on my wrist, causing an explosion of agony that sent sparks flashing behind my eyes. Damn, this girl. Okay, let's see. One of the games where it's just no villain inside. Don't like it. Just a series of books and novel. Actually, an RPG figured behind models of BG. Oh god, there's so many books, and why am I reading all these? I'm reading the story within the story. Okay, so yeah, anyways. Many more chapters to go. Sister Carnelia spoke to me in a tender tone as she sent a wave of immense pain rushing through the whole of my right hand. "I won't have any trouble with you, now will I?" she asked. Far from eyes just brimming with tears, I nodded my head in consent as the salty streams of water ran down my face. Satisfied with my answer, she loosened her grip and I felt the pain vanish, as if I had been some sort of illusion. With a wry smile, she further added, "Don't get me wrong, Toby. I've been sent here to protect you by the goddess herself." What? This girl. This is what she said while instructing me to keep my eyes focused on what lay beyond the window glass. Yet there was something about the name she pronounced the last syllable of my name that really rubbed me the wrong way. Little by little, the line of passengers slowly began to flow out of the train car. Prodded by Sister Cornelia, I inched forward while keeping my gaze on the platform through the passenger car window. Down the stairs which led to the front ticket gate were the figures of those men from earlier this morning, the three thug-like passengers who had been loitering near the large horse head emblem of the tile at the Imperial Station. Oh man. A muffled laugh echoed from her throat as she too noticed them. "Well, isn't this a warm reception party you've got going on?" Cocking my head, I quietly pleaded, "Give me back my orbits." Sister Carnelia said nothing. Members of the crew bid us farewell as we stepped through the exit to disembark the train onto the lead-colored platform below. Angrily, I thought to myself, damn it, what's wrong with these fools? Can't they see what's going on? I shut my eyes halfway to protect them from the drizzle whipping against my face, and I unhurriedly descended their wet set of stairs at a half a pace this time. Sister Carnelia moved along behind me at precisely the same length of stride. Below, the group of thugs waited expectantly at the bottom of the stairs, waiting for me, no doubt. Contemplating the rate of which I was going, I ultimately believed it was only a matter of time before I would be handed over to the enigma group. I caught sight of their soured faces at the distance between us grew smaller, and felt the heat of my left hand tightly gripping my bag growing in intensity till my palm began to sweat profusely. Hitting the midway point of the stairs, Sister Cornelia suddenly whispered into my ear, "Keep your eyes on the ground, Toby." I did as I was told, and cast my gaze down upon the tips of my boots, stained to a darker shade by the rainwater. Then, right at the moment I let out my breath, I felt a deep sense of pressure just below my shoulder blades, and I was forcefully shoved forward. Droplets flew from my saturated fingers, and my world turned upside down as I tumbled down the stairs and slammed back first into the ground. A group of hoodlums. With a muffled crunch, I felt the painful sensation in my ribs crumple under the weight of my body, and then return to normal from their severely compressed state. Two of the seemingly military men who were hit as I toppled down the stairs, like an avalanche unleashed on a pair of young saplings, absorbed a transfer of force and were thrown into a large puddle, collecting on the ground nearby. Shrieks erupted from startling passengers nearby, more shrill than the high-pitched sound of the railway brakes from a decelerating locomotive. As my world spun wildly around me, I lay there, the chill of my tiles seeping to my back. With a concerted effort, I rolled my eyes to the left where my arm remained in an outstretched state. By some act of the goddess, I managed to keep my tight five-finger grip on the bag I had been carrying. In an effort to get up, I slid into a prostrate position, keeping my chin into contact with the ground. Making a low visual sweep of the vicinity, as if my life depended on it, I noticed the military-like physiques of the men had vanished from my view. The only figure I saw standing above me now on the platform was that of Sister Cornelia, and on her shoulder, as if she were merely hefting a sack of grain, was one of the men. Turning into the direction where the train sat in the motionless state, she lobbed the unfortunate man down onto a set of empty tracks below. By the time I had risen to one of the knees while keeping the other planted firmly onto the ground in a half-standing position, the world in front of me was still swaying, undulating in my wavering eyesight. My head slowly rocked back and forth within it, and the vision of Sister Cornelia's boots approached me. Then, with a strong grip, she tugged on my head. For some reason or another, when she did this, I failed to notice that unpleasant feeling that her hand wrapped tightly around mine brought. "Let's go, Toby," she instructed in an authoritative voice, nearly dragging me. She pulled me to my feet, and before long we were hightailing it out of here. Jeez. The onlookers held quite a commotion as they moved hastily out of the way in a determined attempt not to be caught up in the middle of our flight path. The bag in my left hand swung helplessly, knocking against my thigh. After clearing the ticket gate, Sister Cornelia finally let go of my hand, but a sickening, slippery sensation came with it. Looking over at her, I realized that the stomach-churning, slimy feeling in my head had come from the bright red blood which stained both of hers. But I peered back over my shoulder in the direction of the platform as I continued to run, but the fingers of those three men who had been waiting for me at the station were nowhere to be found. Huh? Okay, let me double check. Okay, cool. Chapter 5. Embassy of the Sabbath. I started staring at the particularly melted lump of butter on the stack of cold pancakes. Picking up a fork, I poked at him, and after turning the top one over, I dabbled at the milky yellow substance between the rubbly layers. In doing so, my interest in what sat atop my plate faded to nil. A hanging lamp dangled overhead, making a sporadic buzzing sound as its honey-colored light flickered, creating jittery shadows and distorting my vision within the inn. The pouring rain outside didn't appear as if it would let up anytime soon either. Bringing my face closer to the window, I peered through the film of the water flowing down from the outside of the glass as I tried to make out the dimly lit avenue. Although the station sat right at the end of the road where we were lodged, all the time was visible was the side of the structure obscured by shadow, which prevented me from being able to see the platform. "There's nothing to be worried about," said Sister Cornelia as she returned, wiping her hands with a handkerchief as white as newly driven snow. Stretching the square strip of cloth out. She sat down and placed it neatly on the lap. "I'd like a napkin." Then, in a reassuring tone, she added, "We've seen the last of him for a while." Oh man. Watching the tips of her fingers move as she smoothed out the wrinkles in the piece of fabric resting on her legs, I was hit with a sudden flashback, reviving the awful sight of coppery scent of the sticky blood which had covered those hands not more than a few hours ago. "How can you be so certain?" I asked, still having more than a few reservations. "Because that's how these types of crime syndicates work," she replied, clearly seeming to know all the answers. The waiter came and set a piece in front of Sister Carnelia with a soft clink at the base of the glassy tipped. The dish tapped lightly against the hard surface of the table. After scooting the meat-laden porcelain plate closer to her, she licked off the sauce now covered in the tips of her fingers and almost sent you away. Sickened by the bloody image already in my mind and now the sauce, I tossed my fork aside and leaned heavily back in my chair. The city outside began to fade into shades of gray, and by the time Sister Cornelia was finished tucking away her steak, it had completely sunk into the darkness of the night. I questioned her again. "How can you be so certain that no one will come after us?" "Using a piece of black-crusted bread to wipe up the last bits of sauce," she answered, "because that's how they function. One unit consists of 3 people." Then, as if remembering something else important, she added, "That group was after you. They were Jaeger Corps." Damn. Upon hearing this, I recall seeing some of those men at the landing port some time ago. Only the most renowned and skilled of the mercenary groups had the honor of calling themselves a Jaeger Corps. Or at least that's what Mitch had told me about them. They were soldiers of fortune who were said to relentlessly follow the flow of Mira whenever they allowed to be led, and they would stop at nothing to get at it, even if it meant spilling blood. Warhawks, mercenaries without borders, and a group never to get involved with, is what Mitch often had a habit of saying about them. Instinctively, I slid my foot forward and checked the location of my bag with the tip of it. "It's quite simple, really," Sister Cornelia explained as she reached from her dessert. "You, Toby, are carrying something that's apparently got a lot of people on edge, and someone's hired a Jaeger Corps to take you out. But it's not me they're after, it's what I'm carrying. It's all the same," she retorted as she gulped down the cup of tea in a single breath. "They're going to kill the courier before they even think about searching the contents of his bag. A butcher kills a cow before someone grills the steak, not the other way around." That'd be terrible. Lecture me like all the while, Sister Cornelia took a glossy, tallowed hand knife in her hand and sliced into her apple pie. The powdered sugar, sprinkled on the flaky crust, danced upon the golden light. This is freaking food porn, man. I'm glad I've ate something already. Anyways. I felt the stabbing pain of guilt race through me, just above my gut. Unexpectedly, I began to think about what Mitch could be doing at this moment, but my short period of rumination was cut short when I saw Sister Cornelia's hand stop cold. Glaring into the darkness, eyes focused and intent like a hunting dog's, she tossed something shiny onto the table and eventually rose to her feet. There it was, my ornament. "Where are you going?" Without pausing to answer my question, Sister Cornelia expeditiously fashioned a buckle of her coat. "You got good taste, Toby." One at a time, she set her heels on the chair and tightened her bootlaces. Using the full capabilities of that ornament is no small feat. I think even most bracers would be in for a real surprise if pushing came to shove with you in that ring. Growing ever more impatient, I asked again, "So where exactly is you're going?" "That's none of your concern," came the answer. "Suffice to say, I'd be seeing you again on the morrow." And with that, Sister Cornelia disappeared through the door from the woman's restroom. As if exchanging places, 2 other men entered the restaurant. They walked directly to the table at which I sat and stood before me. Flashing the emblem on his chest without making any sort of eye contact, one of the men said, "We're from the Bracer Guild. I apologize for disturbing you in the middle of your evening, but you'll need to come with us." "Oh, the Bracers!" Okay. My ornament emptied bag and package wrapped in old magazine newspaper were laid out neatly on the table in front of me. The Bracers sitting opposite of me gazed alternatively at my face and the items on the table, as if trying to gauge my reaction to them. Constantly rubbing his chin between his fingers, it appeared to me as though he were making an effort to display his right hand snugly fit with a leather gauntlet. I had been led to the second floor of the lodge by the 2 men. And then, after they had painstakingly checked the layout of the floor, I was taken to the farthest room from the stairs. It occurred to me that the reason for the use of makeshift space was due to there being no guild branch nearby. The first man to sit in front of me was the lanky one. He told me his name, but I soon forgot which one was Clayton and which one was Pavel. About the time I had finished being frisked, the bracer wearing the gauntlets, Clayton or Pavel, whoever it was, returned and whispered something in his partner's ear. It seemed as though they were trying to locate Princess Carnelia, but had no luck. After much prodding on the subject of her and Year Corps, and after relating everything I had heard from the train, I turned to conversation around and, playing the role of the victim, inquired into her past history, though strictly speaking, I guess I was in fact a victim. Her name is Selante, or Selnate. Ein Selnate. Read aloud the lanky bracer from a pocketbook he held just below eye level. Originally a constituent member of the Jaeger Corps, her present affiliation and activities are unknown. In short, adding to his partner's pomposity, she's not the type of person any upstanding citizen should be getting involved with. Well, She reached out his gauntlet and clad down and picked up the object bundle in scrap paper, checking my reaction after all the while. He unwrapped the paper, laying it out flat in the center of the table. Its contents turned out to be a lump of metal ingrained with a sort of clay-like substance. I blurted out I was on my way to Research Institute with the item when everything happened, and then threw in the address of some non-existent client for good measure. The bracers took notes, making sure not to leave out any of the details of our conversation. Then, to dispel any lingering suspicions, I agreed to stay with them under their watchful eyes for the night. The next day, I also found myself inclined to go along with them to the nearest guild branch in order to file a report about the events that happened back at the station, but I had no qualms over the matter. My greatest concern at the moment, after all, was not running into any more trouble. I woke at the sun came over the horizon, and the day broke. With the advent of a peaceful morning, I sat in the bed and breathed a sigh of relief. The bracers who had stood guard at the previous night were no longer present in the room, but the sound of their voices could be heard echoing out in the hallway behind the closed door. Slipping my arms through the sleeves of my jacket, I felt a sharp pain in my right elbow, which brought back vivid memories of the woman from the day before. Suddenly, a feeling of uneasiness came over me, and still half undressed, I began adjusting my ornament. After opening its back cover, I used a thin piece of tan doe skin and started plucking out the quartz installed on each slot. It didn't take but 5 minutes to insert them into different slots and rearrange their configuration with a set of light magic at my base. One by one, I replaced each screw until finally the metallic panel on the back in place, and as a feeling of calm set in, I rolled back over in bed. It was at the time that a tall woman appearing to be a maid opened the door carrying a basin of hot water for the sink, with which guests could shave and wash their faces. After placing the small steaming stub on the table, the woman went quietly around her daily task of removing the bed linen. Finding myself shooed from my own bed, I reluctantly headed toward the basin just beyond the door. I caught sight of the two shadows cutting across the hallway in succession. "They're here!" I heard myself muttered as the low tone of my suppressed voice reached my ears. With only a bar of soap in hand, I remained unbelievably calm as I quickly shut and bolted the door. Then, pondering my next move, I stood still with my back pressed up against the wall. On the other side of the hardened clay wall, the brief clamor of fighting ensued. Fumbling with the chain attached to my hip pocket, I grabbed hold of the ornament I had adjusted just barely moments ago. It was two bracers versus the two others I had seen moments ago. Throwing myself into the mix with two of them from the guild would definitely put us in advantage from a numbers standpoint. However, when I turned again to face the door, the voice of self-doubt came percolating through my closed lips in the form of a distant mutter. "There's only two of them?" I muttered to myself. If Sister Cornelia's words were to be believed, then one unit consisted of 3 people, not 2. Again, I questioned myself inwardly. Then where's the third? The hair on the back of my neck stood out the end as I realized my plight. Someone swung down over the top of my head, catching me around the neck, and the next instant I was flung across the ground. From the corner of my blurred and spotty vision came the inexplicable view of a woman with demonic bloodshot eyes standing over me, trying to wrench the very life out of me with every twist of the sheet she had wrapped tightly around my throat. Clutching my ornament in hand, I activated and fired off a burst of magic while lying half asphyxiated on the wooden planks of the room floor. Blech. The destructive vortex of compressed air sliced deeply into my hip, but at the same time caused the woman to double over before forcefully blowing her into another part of the room. Shreds of whirling linen, flecked and sprayed with fresh blood, blasted out through a gaping hole in the wall where a closed window once stood, leaving nothing behind but shards of broken glass and a frame rent beyond all repair. Oh man. Suspense! Okay. Jeez, this got serious. Death of a friend. Wheezing, I breathed in, the sound high and whistling as the air fought to make it through my constricted windpipe. Still clutching tightly into my ornament, I unwound the sheets from my throat. Utterly exhausted, I tilted my head on its side and watched with reddened eyes. The small stream of saliva dribbled over and over from the edge of my mouth and pooled over the floor. When fresh air finally made its way to my lungs, it initially choked at me nearly as bad as the sheet had. A trump from somewhere behind startled me from my fit. The Jaeger demoness, like a spring-loaded doll, leapt from the floor of the room. The single shot of magic I had previously landed in her gut should have done the trick, but the fluid way she moved around made it appear as if she were unfazed by the blast. Within arm's reach of where I had subconsciously curled myself came a splintering sound of unseasoned wood being honed down by a giant woodcutter's axe. Whew. In the following instant, Sister Carnelia came flying through a newly opened hole in the timber door, her entry punctuated by a cloud of splinters. Her arms as plight as whips, she passed down by a female Jaeger. In a lightning-quick motion and with a turning assault, clocked her opponent flew full of tilt into the face. Eesh. The woman spun with the force of a blow and fell with a tumultuous thud, her head crackling hard against the floor. Ugh, like a prima donna. Or like a prima ballerina, Sister Cornelia raised her knee high until she had it tucked securely under her sternum. She stared down at the outstretched figure on the floor, muscles flexed, and without an ounce of mercy, Sister Cornelia let her judgment fall within the heel of her boot, stomping down and crushing the wretched woman's throat. Ow! As I witnessed her grotesque and unsightly scene, Sister Cornelia gave a quick glance in my direction and beckoned me on. Then, with a nimble hop on the unbound before her, she cleared the broken window frame and lightened to the ground below. Quickly scraping my belongings together, I made around her in the same manner as she had left, out in the window with the two-story drop to the cobblestone sides like a side road below. Waiting close by and helping to break my less than elegant fall, Sister Cornelia had me bound, and we stood flight along the avenue, brightly lit by the morning sun. Yeah, it seems like it, huh? M-rated 2. A deafening blare of the orbital engine whistle, like Legend's whistle, indicated that the first train was about to depart. Sister Cornelia immediately pulled a thicket from out of her coat pocket and held it out in front of the side. Reaching from the fluttering strip of paper between her fingers, I realized I was still carrying the bar of soap from before I chucked it. Not caring where it landed or who it might hit. Aboard the station, the smoggy haze from the incessant smoking of the nagging gentleman had permeated into every nook and cranny of the passenger car. There was also the smell of newly printed publications and the occasional sound of something clearing their throat. It felt rather awkward to have boarded the train for the Imperial City with my bag still in hand. Do you know what your problem is, Toby? Sister Cornelia remarked. You're just like that ornament of yours. Huh. Using her right handkerchief, she snatched the flow of blood from my leg, which had been lacerated by the spinning arrow blades from magic. Once you get yourself into trouble, you keep digging yourself in deeper until someone comes along with a bullied club and whacks some good sense into you. Placing a folded magazine on my lap, she tapped on it with the nail tip of her index finger, indicating that I should read what was inside. It was a copy of the Imperial Chronicle, which had been published just that morning. A several-lined article buried pages beneath more titillating news told of the suspicious death of one horrible factory owner somewhere within the capital. This was the first time I had ever become aware of Mitch's real age. Sister Cornelia continued her lecture as she mercilessly upbraided me for my reckless behavior. You missed being caught up in all of this by hair's breadth, she informed me coolly. At the loss for words over the shock of my Mitch's death, I pulled my magazine away in my trench coat pocket. Another 5 minutes in that shop and you would have gone to meet your maker. Damn. I shook my head with trembling lips and let my thoughts fumble out of my mouth. I just don't get it. Why did Mitch have to die? Images of Mitch's cold body behind the counter alienated my mind with that lump of metal wrapping in scrap paper. Just what the hell had I been carrying all this time, and why did anyone have to die over it? I pondered at length. Sister Cornelia met my eyes and held him. It's because it's an artifact, she said simply. An artifact? I scoffed as I threw off her answer. It's not like I haven't carried a bunch of them before. Artifacts, in short, were the remaining legacy of an ancient civilization, and the generic term are an unidentified mechanism which resembled that of an orbit. I had spent my days as acquirer smuggling any number of those items under the false pretense that the goods I was carrying were nothing more than rare antiques, and rarely placed them in hands of those aristocrats, amongst whom were especially in vogue. And for the most part, my current possession appeared as though it belonged to the same group as the others. Personally, I could find no other value in collecting those artifacts besides the indulging of oneself in a decadent hobby. Citing me as if I was Clue's child, Carnelia chuckled like a Sister Carnelia reboot. You're wrong, Toby. This one's much different than the others. After a moment's pause, she added, "It's alive." Huh. Unable to grasp what she had meant, I looked at her with a questioning expression on my face. Sister Cornelia tried again. What I'm trying to tell you is that it still works. Although I'm not really sure what kind of power it actually has. It was unearthed during an excavation with the Empire's territory about 30 years ago. Oh my gosh, okay. Sister Cornelia's subsequent story about the particular lump of metal told of the dark history surrounding a group of aristocrats who relentlessly sought after it. The artifact itself had transitioned from hand to hand by those powers. As one after another, they were murdered while slumbering in their bedchambers. Then, at the end of the 100 Days' War, its whereabouts were said to have been lost. And strangely enough, it finally turned up in the capital after all this time, she said, finishing up the account. An announcement chimed the passenger's card notifying those riding the scheduled time of arrival. Sister Cornelia uncrossed and recrossed her long legs. The one who was after that artifact hired that Jaeger Corps to bring it to them, whatever the cost. So, as a result, I was dispatched by the church in order to protect you, both you and it from falling into their hands. Oh, God. Oh, man. Let's see. I started staring both at the bag, resting, ensuring... I can't read right now. His words. Okay. I sat staring down at the bag, resting next to me at my feet as we approached our destination, and the moving train quietly began to lose speed. Oh, man. Okay. Still more chapters. Some of the story is starting to sound familiar, though. Okay. But yeah, Flan Tasty. I would have never gave this series a try if I didn't watch your past streams. Oh, man, yeah. I'm chugging away at it little by little, man. Oh, man. When the crowd, she made her way through the rows of seats. Each time, swinging a bag in hand, I became aware of her presence. It was an unerring feeling, quite like I had intentionally brushed up against someone in an offensive way. Furthermore, it was merely inconceivable to my mind that the ancient relic the Yearcrows were pursuing with such a frenzy was sitting right here inside a bag, the stitched cloth of this cheap handmade bag. Blech. Okay, let me try that again. A frenzy was sitting right here inside the stitched cloth of this cheap handbag. What a fool Mitch has been. Had he been known the burden this object would bring would be one far more weighty than the both of us could have ever hoped to bear. I squeezed my hands shut against the thoughts flying around my mind and addressed Sister Cornelia, who followed closely behind me. Will we be making a break for the cathedral once we make it off? Yes, that was the plan, she answered. Scanning the scene outside the window of the passenger car, I think that's the only opinion we got if you want to make it through the day alive. The station where the train was set to arrive was unremittingly crowded with countless rows of passengers, and as usual, the sky was slightly overcast. Everyone outside on the platform stood shivering in silence with their collars drawn up to their ears, huddling close to one another for warmth, like a flock of waterfowl out on the tidelands in midwinter. Don't worry, I won't be tossing you down a flight of stairs this time, Toby, gestured Sister Cornelia. Although if there were two more of you at my disposal, I might have decided otherwise. Evidently, the number in our welcome party at this time had seen a dramatic increase. The odds don't appear to be in our favor, she said in a low voice. Her warm breath tickled the lobe of my ear. We won't be able to leave through the ticket gate. As soon as we stepped off the train, we steadily moved to the opposite end of the platform, and after sneaking out a large door for only an authorized station personnel, we jumped down the path of railroad ties and steel rails below. The biting cold wind of the capital swept freely across the unobstructed railroad tracks, causing me to shudder as it unfurled our coats with a chilling touch. Slipping between the couplers of a pair of freight cars, we moved cautiously along their edge, sticking close to the shadows over the cargo platform. Workers were busy unloading containers. Whew, for someone who has like a mindset on becoming a dealer of pilfered goods, gaining illicit entry into the station house would be one of the first of all basics. Showing my ticket, I spoke politely to one of the workers. Then, with a scenario picked out in my head, I sold it to him as I played the part of a manager here on business with a celebrity of notable repute. Midway through our conversation, I introduced Sister Carnelia, who did her best to show the man was a glamorous smile and feminine pose. I had possibly gone a bit overboard when I started. That she was an opera singer because of the way she carried herself made her look more akin to a low wedge sing-along a bar of drunkards. Yet in spite of it all, the worker graciously let us through. Damn, man, you're so good at this. It's almost scary, Toby, Sister Cornelia said as we raced through the station's warehouse sector. You should seriously consider doing another job, she went on. I bet you're going to tell me to join the Bracer Guild, right? Come on, those guys would turn me down in a heartbeat, I said as I laughed off the thought. Then, throwing the idea back into her court, asked, so how about yourself? Why don't you join the Bracer Guild? Reaching to the end of the warehouse sector, we came to a stop in front of the large chain-link fence. Sister Cornelia crouched down and, while sliding a drainage cover to the side, laughed at my previous question as if I were insane. Are you kidding? She asked. They'd gun me down the second I set foot in one of their branches. The winding, narrow stone tunnels like the one we were in ran everywhere beneath the Capitol. We crawled along the lights shining down through the drainage gates on the side of the large road above us, illuminated in the way like a trail of flickering orbital lampposts. The feet of those walking along the avenue passed right by where we were, but not a single person noticed us scraping our way along below them. And for some strange reason or another, the world just beyond the thin, flagstone-paved road appeared so dazzling in my eyes. Yet the Jaeger Corps lost of the artifact in hand and the senseless sudden death, all of which had never crossed my mind before, lay in wait for me. Dared I to venture into the world above alone? As we pressed on, I began to think that the small round tunnel which we were crawling through would run on forever, when finally it merged with a high-ceilinged sewer surrounded by walls of countless blocks of chiseled stone. We're going through here and make our way over to where the cathedral is located, Sister Carnelia insisted. Raising one brow, she pointed her finger upward. It's a lot safer down here than it is up there. That's fine and all, but what are we going to do if it gets attacked? Sister Cornelia grabbed my hand and with that stepped into the muddy darkness beyond. Don't worry, Toby, she assured me. Faith isn't the only thing supporting the church. Oh man, the church! 9. Cornelia. Okay. The flicker of dying orbital lamps mounted at the equidistant lengths along the sewer wall sent thin streaks of light across the surface of the rippling flow of filthy sewage. Passing in front of these one by one, Sister Cornelia sped down the stone sidewalk as the sound of her body cutting through the racing tunnel's winds trailed out behind her. Panting and out of breath, I continued to move my feet toward the darkness which lay before me as I chased after Sister Cornelia's flickering shadow. Wayworn, yet without any moment of repose, we headed on relentlessly with our sights set upon the cathedral of the Septian Church. We moved swiftly across the moss-covered stone pavement. The clacking of our heels echoed in the dimly lit underground. Above ground, the walking distance of the city roads of the railway station to the cathedral was about 3 blocks. If we made our way through the drainage ditch just beyond the sluice gate, we would find ourselves in this public square outside the massive sanctuary. Up ahead, the light of another orbital lamp came into view. Turning their head in my direction, and without a word, Sister Cornelia extended her right hand outward in a wide motion indicating that we would be turning the way at the next corner. Then, as if preparing for something, she rolled down both shoulders in a grinding motion and relieved the last of her tension with a pop of the neck. It seemed to me as though she knew all too well what was lurking within the Terrorbone's conduit ahead. Under the unsteady and sporadic coruscation of light, the body of Sister Cornelia surged around the corner and disappeared from view. 1, 2, 3 went walloping echoes, followed by the sound of something being rolled into the channel of filthy sludge. As I turned the corner, the first thing which leapt into my sight were the contorted figures of 2 men on the ground, whom I barely missed treading on. Sister Cornelia, who was by this time several steps ahead, continued to run at her usual pace as if nothing had happened during the preceding seconds. It's Carnelia! Came an angry but noticeably wayward voice from behind. I glanced to my rear to locate its source, and there I found a man who had dragged himself from the fecal-filled liquid, now lying next to his dead comrades, yelling into his dying breath as blood leaked out out of his open mouth. Carnelia! She's down there! She managed to croak before falling silent and still. Sister Cornelia paid no attention nor made any effort to look back. I turned my face forward and followed her example. The walls of the conduit led directly to the sluice gate, squared out in an ominous mouth of darkness, seemingly waiting for the next unsuspecting meal. Sister Cornelia gradually slowed her pace to match mine as I, by the time, became completely exhausted and out of breath. It looks like these guys are dead serious about getting their hands on that item this time, she said as she focused her eyes on... damn it. The darkness before us. So, were those men old friends of yours or something? I inquired. Sister Cornelia turned to face me with her dark, scarlet eyes. Is that what you heard from those bracers the other day? She asked. I nodded my head and questioned her no further. With the head slightly overturned, I forced myself onward, her eyes fixated onto the tips of my boots. Unexpectedly, Sister Cornelia opened her mouth and said, Do you remember that woman you had a run-in with back at the end? I nodded yes. The whole reason I gave up my life as a mercenary is because I didn't want to meet a tragic end like that, she continued. A life of no meaning, forgotten by all. I looked up at Sister Cornelia and seeing a slight show of emotion in the side of her face, heard her repeat the same line of words a few times more before finishing her thoughts. If I'm going to cash in my life, in my life chips, then I think the best that I fight for something worth fighting for. At least that's the way I'd be able to leave a legacy of my existence behind. Taking in her words, I ran steadily beside her as I felt the sense of nondescript apprehension slowly begin to creep over me. Damn it! And then brace his head. Thinking of my emotions on her face. I'm going to catch him. Okay, here I go. Taking her words, I ran beside her as a sense of nondescript apprehension slowly began to creep over me. During the short intervals between breaths, it suddenly seemed as if I were hearing the faint sound of sloshing water from behind, which caused me to prick my ears and turn my head to its direction. So you noticed too, huh, Toby? Sister Cornelia slowed her step and finally coming to a complete stop. They blockaded us from behind, so there's no turning back now, she said, direness of her situation heavy in her voice. We have arrived at an intersection where the conduit we were in and around cross paths, and just beyond a wide, flaccid flow of sewage water before us. I could see the dimly lit sluice gate. I placed my back against the damp bricks of a nearby wall and for a moment tried to catch my breath. They're probably lying in wait for us. Sister Cornelia assessed the souls stolidly after glaring across the flow of sewage from the mirror channels and then turning her head to the rear and narrowed her eyes again. And unfortunately this time we won't be able to circumvent them. Blech. With the sound of composure revealing her utmost resolve, Sister Carnelia took in a few deep breaths. I laid my hand on my ornament, gripping into the palm of my sweaty hand, and then wrapped the strap of my bag securely around my opposite wrist. And as always, Sister Cornelia checked her boots before standing upright, then taking a few steps back and holding my breath, I raced toward and darted into the stinging flow of waste. Oh man, okay, so... Alright, 2 more chapters to go. Alright. Chapter 10, The Last Stand. Sister Carnelia made such a haste as she aimed for the path of the opposite side of the sludge-filled channel that I could have sworn she was actually running from the liquid surface. Based on my observation of the minuscule splatters her feet produced, and of course she passed me by in the blink of an eye, the space growing wider and wider between us and I had continued to trudge my way through the filthy muck. Flashes of magic erupted from the darkness by the sluice gate and ripped through the air into rapid succession, but none of them could overtake the speed at which Sister Carnelia moved. In an unyielding offense by the shadowed aggressors, the settled fluctuance in the depths of the channel was thrown up in the form of a powerful tsunami, and in an instant, before clearing myself from the destructive path, I feared that the terrible wall of sedimented filth would crash me under its weight and bring me to unsightly end. With a mid-air spin to avoid the last of the upcoming magic, Sister Cornelia flew to the opposite side of the channel with incredible speed. Hurling to the wall of pitted up sandbags behind which the attackers took cover, she whirled her arms in a ferocious onslaught. One by one, like rows of pins stuck between by a weighted object, a line of standing Jaegers crumbled to the ground. Sister Cornelia's attacks were like a whirlwind of death, blurred with the speed at which they struck. They came in advancing at inconceivable angles, plundering throats, slashing open arteries, and then they were gone. So it was that when I finally reached the cobbled path beyond the stagnant channel, not a soul was left standing besides Sister Cornelia and myself. The cathedral is at the end of the ladder, just beyond the gate, she indicated as she flicked dripping blood from her fingers like a child who forgot a handkerchief to dry her wet hands. Her eyes shone with the active glow of battle. The Jaegers can't be far behind, so we'd better hurry, she warned. And as if to puncture her warning, the damp sound of numerous feet kicking up water as they advanced toward our present location had now become clearly audible to my ears. Stepping over the handful of Jaeger corpses lying scattered about behind the walls of sandbags, we made our way from the dry bed channel which lay ahead of us. I placed my hands on the slightly damp stone floor from the empty channel and crawled through the half-open door of the sluice gate. A falling water droplet struck the nape of my neck as I passed through the cramping opening, causing me to stop dead in my tracks. In the moment that it followed, I recognized the sound of an ornament overhead on the verge of discharging a burst of magic. "Toby!" came the obstinable voice of Sister Cornelia, as my vision was instantly flooded with a wave of exceedingly brightness. Then, in the midst of the world of blinding night, came to the hand of a savior which grabbed me firmly by the shoulder. The powerful feeling of being dragged and the explosion produced by magic rupturing stone were almost simultaneous. At the blooming roar swept across the whole of my body, I was thrown backwards toward the ground. Despite my clouded vision, I managed to somersault before landing into the prone position. Choking on the filthy puddle I had fallen face down in, I lifted my head in time to see a cloud of blackened dust being heavily heaved from the mouth of the halfway raised sluice gate door. And as if my worst nightmare had now become reality, I watched as one after another the blockading Jaegers emerged from a smoky cloud, each bearing a glinting blade. I floundered about on the slippery mud and watched as their ranks sprang into action and closed in their ragged facial features now visible to my eyes, instantly rolling to the side. I unsheathed my hidden blade as I attempted to deflect the wide arching stash of another with my bag. The cloth of my bag, over which the sharp edge ran, split open without a sound, and the paper-wrapped ornament fell into the cobbled floor. Frantically, I searched for the ornament at my side, but I was unable to get a grip on it because of my clumsy, panic-stricken state. One of the mercenary men, his eyes intent on my throat, drew back his long sword to end my life, but before he could make a move, a dark silhouette appeared from behind him. It was Sister Cornelia. Her hands moved with such menace, disarmed the man in an instant, and left only his sword behind before he was launched from view into the hanging shadows veiled in dank conduit. As the sound of the falling sword struck the ground with a high-pitched clink, Sister Cornelia dropped to her knees. Her soft whispers, like whispered words, were full of regret. "I'm sorry, Toby." With her head bowed forward, I watched in disbelief as several streaks of blood began to run down the side of her face. "It looks like the goddess may be calling you home too," she said gently. Once again, Sister Cornelia rose to her feet, her coat hanging in tatters. Eyeing her outer garment's ragged state, I know for certain that it had been caused by the previous blast of magic. In order to protect me from harm, Sister Cornelia had willingly used her body as a shield to absorb the brunt of the force. And now a stain of effervescing crimson blood had begun to seep through the cloth covering her breast. I swiped on the artifact with a tumble to the ground from the hole in my severed bag and tore away the wet paper which covered its surface. Then, with a cold lump of metal in hand, I placed it on top of my ornament as I gripped them both tightly together. The sound of footfall from the Jaeger corps had by now subsided. They stood in a cluster with swords drawn, effectively blocking any possible escape through the sluice gate. Sister Cornelia had out a shrill cry as if taking the sound to be a command to attack, unleashed the energy pent up within my orbit. The device roared, and at the instant of magic was discharged, I felt an instant wave of searing heat graze over my cheeks as my entire body was immediately blown backwards by the powerful force. Stunned, I collapsed to the floor. When I finally opened my eyes, I could see Sister Cornelia standing above me with her back turned to face me. Her right arm had lost all strength to function and hung limply at her side. Dazedly, she slid to her knees and stumbled to the ground before me. I pulled Sister Cornelia close to myself and hugged her tightly, blasted the pack of assailing mercenaries with an instantaneous wave of magic. But then it was all over, my last stand ending as soon as it begun. Countless razor-sharp swords tips stared down at us from all sides. Convinced that I had finally reached my life's terminus, I raised my hand, and while pasting a false hope in my orbit that it could somehow protect us, I activated it, the last of its energy being consumed as it was drained to empty. Whirling arrow blades spun around us as I closed my eyes and accepted my fate, and behind my darkened eyelids, an endless realm of whiteness began to spread out before me. Shoot. A legacy never to be forgotten. I was swallowed by the light, only to be spewed moments later onto a patch of hardened ground. The air was filled with the scent of sun-baked earth. Yet, for being on the floor of some grandiose heavenly estate inherited by those in the afterlife, it felt quite like the flagstones I had grown accustomed to in my past life. Upon feeling around in my immediate surroundings, my searchings had found soft locks of disheveled hair. It seemed as though Sister Carnelia had come as well as I to meet our Creator firsthand. Gradually, as I laid there, I felt something well swell within the pit of my stomach. Wearily and spent, I just let the feeling spread over me. It was about the time that the sound of murmurous voices started to fill the air around us. Warm breath trickled across my nose and brow, letting us know that I was being stared at directly in the face. As my eyes adjusted to the intensity of the night, I realized that I was looking into the face of a young girl, who beamed back at me brightly with the wildest of smiles. However, she seemed a bit young to hold the esteemed position of the goddess. The knell of a bell overhung rang out loud and clear. Strangely, it had the sound exactly like the cathedral's distinctive toll. Taking in the series of events to be rather odd, I picked myself up, and at last awakened from the dream which had temporarily invaded my senses. There it was, the familiar cityscape, the sounds, and even the scent of the breeze. I knew the place by heart. It was the public square of the imperial city, which unfolded before that great cathedral of the Septine Church. I opened my fingers in my right hand and stared down at the metallic lump in its palm, entrusted to be my midst. Golden filaments of light swirled across the surface of the artifact. I instantly recalled Sister Cornelia's words. "It's alive," she had said, and as I watched the ancient light gradually fade away before closing my hand around it, Darn it, I did it again. Okay. Damn it, I lost my place. Septine Church, golden fields wide, recalled Sister Cornelia is alive, and she had said, as I watched the ancient light gradually fade from my hand around the surface once more, I believed it. Supporting each other by wrapping our arms around one another's shoulders, Sister Cornelia and I hobbled and limped our way toward the magnificent cathedral as the awe-inspiring figure of the goddess. Aidos stood silently with unfurled wings, watching over us from the deep-hued stained glass window from above. And as further mentions followed, they were all settled in an orderly fashion. The metal lump which Sister Carnelia had so daringly risked her life for was turned over to His Eminence the Cardinal, who presided over the cathedral. He disappeared with it through the thick open door of the sacred vault. The level of corruption which had spread like a plague among members of the imperial court, influential aristocrats, and even commissioned officers in the imperial army astounded even those mediators acting on behalf of the Bracer Guild. I stayed close by Sister Cornelia as she was laid out on a pew within the chapel of the cathedral. The real sisters of the church delicately pulled off her coat and cut her open her vest, now struck with her body with dried blood. Upon doing so, they found an ornate shirt of chainmail just beneath the layer of her clothing, which for some reason, strange reason, seemed to bewilder them all. The next day, a certain aristocrat who had hired a Jaeger corps to carry out his selfish bidding agreed to relinquish the artifacts in his possession in return for keeping his estate. Hence, the collection of forbidden antiques were brought under the safekeeping of the Septine Church. Sworn to secrecy, I made immediate arrangements to take leave of the Calvard Republic, my destination, a high-class resort which turned out to be an excellent way to recover physically and mentally, as well as forget about the series of events which had occurred over the past 3 days. Naturally, the bracers assigned to provide my escort were none other than Clayton and Pavel, who bore me left, guided me without a word to where Sister Cornelia was resting. I talked with Sister Cornelia, who had awoken from a short interval, but as I got up to leave, she reached out her dainty hand and said to me, "Before you go, I want to tell you my real name. It's Ein Selnate. I took her unembellished hand in mine and gripped it firmly, as I expressed my appreciation for what she had done. And today, now 3 years later, I stood staring at her name once again, but this time printed on a page of the Imperial Chronicle, Ein Selnate. Below those printed characters ran a few lines of embellished article. Yesterday, a corpse was discovered in the urban area of the capital just before dawn. The body was found to be covered with multiple stab wounds. The departed in life had been involved in charitable work and brought salvation in many affiliated souls in various regions throughout the land. As I read the last line, I envisioned the deceased figure of Sister Carnelia lying motionless upon a darkened street. Yet despite the blood-stained face I envisioned in my mind, I saw her as she rested in peace. A gentle smile crossed her face and vindicated from any transgressions in life. As I rolled up the copy of the magazine in hand, I brushed my hand lightly across the shining bracer emblem pinned onto my chest. Almost 2 years ago had passed since I converted to my new line of work, which Sister Cornelia had so graciously recommended to me. And finally, even today, I became used to my real name. Toby came to whisper of Sister Cornelia as it resurrected in my ears. Not only known as Toby, I pressed my forehead up against the cold, clouded window of the passenger car. The refugent eyes of Sister Cornelia shining brightly like a carnelian stone, forever ingrained in my memory. In my mind's eye, I watched as her coat sleeves trailed out behind her as she dashed away into the darkness of my memories. Opening my eyes, I gazed out through the window glass, and there I saw my bleeding, rogue-colored illumination of the Imperial City as it faded away between the heavy white fog. The end. Damn. I read so much. But damn, poor Carnelia. She died the way she wanted. That's pretty nice. Whew. Yay. Streaming this game again. Yeah, I'm trying to. Hi, Heavy. You just see me finished like a long, basically short, like light novel. Seriously, man. No regrets whatsoever. Well, thank you, man. Oh, jeez. Yay, pause. That was a lot of reading, man. Wow. Pardon me. Maybe I should just highlight the whole thing. I'll probably do that anyway, because why not? But yeah, whew. Poor Carnelia. Well, you know what? Carnelia died doing noble acts. Good for her.